Well, I just want to extend a warm welcome again to everybody. Thank you for coming out to our second keynote for the Black Ecologies discussion series. It's really my great honor to introduce, the two scholars who are going to speak to us today. It's really my honor, and I'm thankful for everyone to spend your evening or your early afternoon with us this afternoon. We've organized this discussion series around three particular themes: extraction, disposability, and resistance. And I'm so excited about today's keynote that really gets into so many of these important topics, and also thinking about revolution, love, and kind of, world making. This effort, the Black Ecologies discussion series, builds on an ongoing collaboration between myself and Dr. J.T. Rohn at Arizona State University, as we think about Black ecologies and Black geographies in community with artists and organizers in order to imagine horizons beyond extraction and disposability. We hope to draw on the histories of Black resistance to racism and ecocide as twin forces in order to interrupt the death and degradation of Black and Indigenous life, and to chart alternative horizons for ourselves and our communities germane to these histories and socialities. We've written together, and actually, I'm so happy our piece in Southern Cultures just came out on Earth Day together, me and JT's piece. But we've written together and we helped plan this event together. It's been my great honor to work with JT, and it always will be, period. We are, of course, indebted intellectually in this work to so many thinkers, critical thinkers in Black geographies and in Black environmental thought, some of whom we've been able to see their research over the past month. Also, we are heavily indebted to two of JT's mentors, Dr. Claudrina Harold and Dr. Wendy Marshall. They continue to provide models about how to think, how to act, and how to create in the service of Black possibility, Black liberation, Black art, and Black futures. For this particular program, especially as we concluded, we want to thank first and foremost our co-conspirators in pulling this program together: Emerald Rutledge, who's a PhD candidate in English literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison; Leah Kaplan, PhD student in philosophy at Emory University; and Alexis Young, undergraduate 4+1 journalism major at Arizona State University. Without their contributions to help bring together the themes and compose this program, it would not have been possible. So thank you to them. We're also grateful to our sponsors, especially ASU's Institute for Humanities Research, ASU, which houses JT's appointment in African American Studies, and also the School of Social Transformation, Deans Madavi and Cohen in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dean Boone of the College of Global Futures, the School of Philosophical and Religious Studies, the Digital Humanities Initiative, and the Environmental Humanities Initiative. In particular, we want to thank Jeannie Colquette, Jeannie, you know why, Kike Palacios and SST, and Selena Oshuna, Lauren Whitby, and the tireless Lynn Grumbach. Thank you again for all of your help for this entire month. It's been wonderful to work with you and to meet you as well. We also would like to shout out and especially thank People's Strike, which emerged last May out of a call with leaders from Cooperation Jackson, calling for mass action against the conditions of disposability with COVID that COVID brought. Essential workers and police murders brought directly to the forefront of our collective consciousness over the past few months. In many ways, our efforts to bring together these materials are in dialogue with People's Strike's demands to decarbonize the economy, end fossil fuel and extractive industries, institute a program based on reparations, repairing damages to frontline and fence line lands and communities, the restoration of indigenous sovereignty, land back, and the transitioning of workers in petrochemical, nuclear, and extractive industries into ecologically sustainable work, as well as institute food sovereignty policies in industrial food and animal warehousing conditions that stimulate the germination of viruses like COVID-19, contaminate our soils, and deplete our water, contaminate our soils. I would also like to thank, last but not least, all of the wonderful contributors to these discussions over the past month. Thank you so much. And I'm especially excited about today. As this event goes forward, please feel free to use the chat to underscore or uplift insights or thoughts to which you are bearing witness. You can also use the chat function or the raise hand function during the Q&A. At that time, we'll also pin participants to the top of your Zoom so you can engage in dialogue with those people who are here today. Please note these discussions will be recorded, so if you prefer to remain off video, that's totally fine. So please get comfortable, take care of yourself, and that'll bring us a long way towards practicing the collectivity we need to survive the current environmental situation. Please note, this discussion is polyphonic. No one is coming from the same experiences, understandings, interpretations, methods, means, or modes of creation. Respect people even if you disagree with their expressed ideas. Automatic closed captioning has been implemented if you would like to activate it as well. Okay, so I want to first introduce Dr. Leslie Alexander. I'm really excited about Dr. Alexander's presence here today. I'm really joyful that she's able to be here with us today. Dr. Leslie Alexander is Associate Professor in the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. Professor Alexander specializes in early African American and African diaspora history, particularly late 18th and early 19th century Black culture, political consciousness, and resistance movements. Dr. Alexander's forthcoming book, Fear of a Black Republic, African Americans, Haiti, and the Birth of Black Internationalism, explores how Haitian independence influenced the rise of Black internationalism in the United States. Professor Alexander's work has been supported by the Ford Foundation, and she is the immediate past president of the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, ASWAD, and is an executive council member on the National Council for Black Studies. She also serves on the advisory councils for the Journal of African American History, the Black Scholar, the International Journal for Africana Studies, and the Harvey Goldberg Series for Understanding and Teaching History. So again, a warm welcome to Dr. Leslie Alexander. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I just really feel honored that you invited me to participate. I have such extraordinary respect for the work that you all do, and I'm just really excited for today's conversation. I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker today, who is Dr. Ashanté Reese. She is an assistant professor of African and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas at Austin. She earned her PhD in anthropology from American University in 2015, and she also holds a Bachelor of Arts in History with a minor in African American Studies from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. Broadly speaking, Dr. Reese works at the intersection of critical food studies and Black geographies, examining the ways Black people produce and navigate food-related spaces and places in the context of anti-Blackness. Animated by the question, who and what survives, much of Dr. Reese's work has focused on the everyday strategies Black people employ while navigating inequity. Her first book, Black Food Geographies, Race, Self-Reliance, and Food Access in Washington, D.C., takes up these themes through an ethnographic exploration of anti-Blackness and food access. Black Food Geographies won the 2020 Best Monograph Award from the Association for the Study of Food and Society. Her second book, Black Food Matters, Racial Justice in the Wake of Food Justice, is a collection co-edited with Hanna Garth that explores the geographic, social, and cultural dimensions of food in Black life across the US. Currently, Dr. Reese is working on a new project that explores the continuity of plantation geographies and abolitionist possibilities within rural and urban food systems vis-a-vis the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's agribusiness sector. I just want to quickly note, because I know we're all really excited and enthusiastic to hear what Dr. Reese is going to share with us today. But I do want to just quickly note that just a few days ago, Dr. Reese published an article entitled "Tarry with Me, Reclaiming Sweetness in an Anti-Black World." And I think the link may have been placed in the chat a little bit earlier, but I'll place it again for anyone who may have joined us more recently. But I really want to encourage you to take a look at it when you can. As I said to her just a few moments ago, it is a beautiful piece. It's a beautiful piece in a haunting way that explores the painful challenges of reconstructing the lives of our ancestors, including those who at the turn of the 19th century, in their efforts to find freedom, were incarcerated, worked to death, and then forgotten. It is just a powerful, beautiful piece, and I really encourage you all to take a look. Dr. Reese, I am very much looking forward to hearing your reflections for us today, so I will turn it over to you with gratitude for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you, JT, Justin, everybody who had something to do with getting me here. I know the logistics of trying to make something happen, even when it's on Zoom, are just that, they're logistics and their labor. And so I really appreciate all of you. So I guess by way of preface, before I get started, so the last few months, and maybe not a few months, maybe the last 9 months, I've been rethinking ideas that have been formative for me in my work. And in part of this rethinking ideas has also been me revisiting sites, literal sites, places when I can, but also just kind of thinking about places and spaces that have changed. And so that is partly what inspired the title of this talk for today, which in a second will change to another title. So I will get started. And for those of you who don't like it when people read talks, I'm so sorry. It is a thing, and it is going to happen. In April 2018, I returned to the neighborhood in Northeast DC, where over 6 years at that point, I had conducted ethnographic fieldwork. It was not my first time returning. Every time I visit DC, I tried to visit, at least stopping in the small grocery market where I spent most of my time. But this visit was different for several reasons. It was the first time that I was in the city since the passing of the grocery market's owner, the person who assumes the pseudonym Mr. Jones in Black Food Geographies. He had passed away a few months prior in January, and it was a loss that I was still making sense of. I knew that he had been sick because on one occasion, he told me about an extended hospital visit. I noticed that his stamina was lower than usual, but I did not think it was my place to ask, and he told me no more details than those necessary to convey that he was recovering. I was, like always, happy to see him, though I did not know it would be my last time seeing him on this earthly plane. The second reason it was different was because I wasn't alone. Part of my visit in April was to share my research with a journalist who was writing a story about food, self-reliance, and community. We'd spent 6 hours together that day, first sharing lunch and talking about my research, and then driving over to the neighborhood so that I could show him significant places and recount some of my days walking the streets and meeting new people. When we got there, I first took him to the grocery market. Everything on the outside looked the same. It retained the same signage, the same well-swept street corner, and the same bars on the window. I was nervous. I had not been in the store without Mr. Jones being there. I didn't know how it would feel, but I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. When we entered the store, me first and the journalist following, I stopped and I gasped. The space had a completely different configuration. The counter where Mr. Jones used to sit and people watch or give me unwanted advice about dating had been replaced by shelves. The makeshift bench in the window where I would sit, or in this case, my student is sitting, while listening to all of this advice was gone. In fact, the window was not visible at all. Instead, there was an enclosed space with bulletproof glass standing between me and the cashier behind it. Presumably responding to my gasp and me being frozen in place, the person behind it stood to ask if I needed help. No, I shook my head quickly, but I used to come here a lot. The owner was my friend. Fearing that I would become uncontrollably emotional in front of this journalist who was recording my every move, I walked outside for some air, mumbling something about not being prepared for that experience. In that moment, I was completely overtaken and overwhelmed by grief, having not expected to feel a double loss, that of Mr. Jones and then that of the store itself. I stood outside for a moment, arrested and stalled by my acute awareness of the journalist and his tape recorder. If I was gonna fall apart, it was not gonna be then. My heart was broken, but my conditioning to keep everything together in the presence of mixed company kicked in, such that I could not be present with my own heartbreak. So I jotted down a few notes, took a deep breath, and directed the reporter to the next stop. Pound sets, something reused or altered, but still bearing visible traces of its earlier form. We left the store heading to a second spot I'd written about in my book, a community garden at a public housing project. We meandered the streets with me pointing out important sites, and when we arrived at the garden, my breath again stolen away. Enclosed in a courtyard where the garden used to be was only freshly mowed grass, no raised beds, no fruit trees on the hillside, and for the second time in less than 20 minutes, I encountered a space that felt so significant to me and people that I loved that no longer existed. I tried to contact one of the gardeners who used to tend the garden, but got no response. And around us, people in the community watched me walk around this empty space with a white man journalist following behind me. I wondered if they thought and wondered what I was looking for. In the moment, still overwhelmed, I was also profoundly disoriented as the space that I'd come to know no longer existed in the ways that I'd known it. In the moments and days that followed, I racked my brain trying to reconstruct Mr. Jones's store, something separate from the store that I had entered with the journalist. Over several months to come, I would wonder, what do we do with memories in the wake of spatial loss? How do they help to reconstruct places that may only live in the stories that we tell? And then finally, what am I to make of this archive of photos and audio of places and people that no longer exist? On the one hand, the loss of these two spaces could be tied to the most immediate present condition, the ways that gentrification threatens Black life and Black space in a city that still touts its Blackness for some semblance of authenticity. The changing neighborhood and consumers were, after all, a concern for Mr. Jones, who had, for as long as I had known him, been thinking about what to do with the store when he retired or when he passed on. The slow but steady removal of families from the housing projects, the boarded up windows that signaled their departures to make way for new development, was in part what made the garden one of radical possibility, because the gardeners tended to it despite knowing that they would have to relocate one day. The gardeners intended, as Ms. Johnson said, to keep on flourishing. Ephemeral, lasting only a short time. All of this is true about gentrification, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. The garden and Mr. Jones's store were two living experiments in freedom, living experiments in how freedom gets lived out within and through mundane everyday practices, like maintaining a Black-owned store across 2 generations and saving and planting seeds on stolen land that would soon be revitalized. This garden and the store expose the limits of subjecting Black space to traditional knowledges and measurements that are typically used in geography. They are examples of why terms like food desert continue to do the anti-Black work of erasure, because they fail to see the imaginative, creative, and everyday ways Black people make lives. And it ignores the palimpsests that show up again and again and again in place and across time. Black food geographies both reveal the uncertainty of space and the terrain of political struggle itself. Black places that no longer exist in a material sense are important not only because of how they disappear, but also because of how they force us to contend with memory as an alternative geography that inform residents' engagement with the city, and also researchers' understandings of what remains. This is part of the problem of talking about gentrification writ large. At that scale, it loses the granular and presumes that what will happen to spaces like the garden and the store are already predetermined. But I think Grace, that imagining and practicing, refuses to believe such. At that scale, it is hard to see Black livingness as a fugitive practice or a practice that reimagines and ruptures. What changes if our ethnographic or research practices are reconceptualized as simultaneously being archival practices that capture those imaginings and ruptures in real time before or as they are becoming traces of themselves, before or as they morph into something anew? What if our ways of naming, documenting, capturing, and knowing a place were not primarily constructed as research practices at all, but as contributions to a different kind of world making, one that we may or may not live to see? What if the urgency of our work is not primarily understood through the timelines of writing a dissertation or submitting a tenure package? What if our work is guided not by saving or preserving a space forever, but rather by building the conceptual and methodological tools that will help catapult us into our rightful place in the stars? How, what, who, and where we choose to do our work is a professional and sometimes personal choice, but it is also a political one that has implications not only for our own work, but for those of the work of people in the future. And writing about working with archival fragments that would eventually become the basis for Wayward Lives' beautiful experiments, Saidiya Hartman writes, quote, "In my search for her, I soon encountered all the others hovering about her: the sociologist, housing reformer, probation officer, club women, social worker, vice investigator, journalist, and psychiatrist, all of them insisting that their view of her was the truth. One of them was always there, standing in my way, blocking my path whenever I encountered her," end quote. Whenever I read this passage, I wonder whose paths are or have been obstructed by the way I choose or not choose to document during fieldwork. Here, I'm sensitive to the fact that in some ways, these professions, our professions, train us to obstruct as much as they train us to reveal. But rather than being an intentional choice, obstruction as a tool of refusal, perhaps, it becomes a form of disciplining. So here I'm thinking about, what can the speculative open up for us? What if our field notes are planned to be read by others, not just only by researchers, but by those who are looking for a path forward? What if the notes, fragments, images that we capture are all that was left at the end of this world and the beginning of the next. And so if I were going to revise the title of this talk, I would call it Falling from the World, Earthseed, Black Geographies, and the Apocalyptic Now. During the trifecta of the COVID-19 pandemic, climate disaster, and anti-Black violence, many have turned to Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower for inspiration, for guidance on how to move through the apocalyptic now that she predicted and wrote about over 30 years ago. In The Parable of the Sower, we meet 15-year-old Lauren Olamina, who is a hyper-empath, a condition that is debilitating when she takes on other people's emotions. But despite this, Lauren Olamina is clear-eyed about freedom. 3 years later, when her community is attacked and her family is killed, Lauren gathers other survivors and leads them through the chaotic world outside of the gated community. And I just want to pause here that in writing this talk or revising this talk, it was not lost on me to also be thinking about Ma'Khia Bryant and how many other Lauren Olaminas don't get to be the people who are leading us away toward freedom. We know about Lauren Olamina's movements, thoughts, experiences, and visions for building Earthseed because she documents them, alternating between journal entries and passages from Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Lauren Olamina writes to us from the future. We meet her in 2024 and follow her through 2027. During our time together, Lauren Olamina shows us the future of this world: climate disaster that makes water near impossible to find, multinational consolidation and corporate greed that leaves whole communities left to die, desperation, murder, gang violence, constant threats to individual and communal safety. She also shows us what is required to build anew: the clearing, the gathering, the documenting, the visioning. In short, Lauren Olamina shows us the now. And I cannot help but wonder how the world would be different if more people listened to and learned from her and from other Black girls. But to not only listen and to learn from, but to adopt these practices of clearing, gathering, documenting, and visioning in our research, read world-making practices. So for the rest of this talk, I'd like to engage in some reimagining of the two sites that I opened with, Mr. Jones's store and the community garden, through a series of speculative field notes to conceive of how we too might build and live as Earthseed. In an essay for Efflux Architecture, Ruha Benjamin offers 3 field note excerpts, one from 1816, one from 2016, and one from 2216. Together, the field notes help us think through the past, present, and future of the genetic and aesthetic choices made at any given moment, bringing into sharp focus the violence and the casually eugenic processes bound up in narratives of progress and modernity. This methodological exercise, she writes, quote, is a way to fashion possible futures and probable paths, enabling analysts to critically reflect on the present. In experimenting with the lines between fact and fiction, we can begin to question the assumption of inevitability that surrounds technological development, end quote. And we can do this while exploring the relationality of innovation and containment. Who and what is fixed and placed, corralled and coerced, so others are free to fabricate all of our collective futures. It's not lost on me that in Ruha's speculative field notes, food is the connecting thread. In 2016, the question of how to address food security. In 1816, forced feeding of enslaved people. In 2216, a world in which the world food supply is not enough to sustain the human population, and thus there are those who have been genetically modified to self-sustain, and those presumably surviving through malnutrition. At its core, the apocalyptic world that Benjamin writes does not look very different from the apocalyptic world of the now, though in the now we still have time, or maybe at least just a little hope, in refusing and rupturing the preventable deaths and suffering that capitalism produces. The question is, and has always been, but how? While I'm necessarily concerned with how we write different futures, the willingness, ability, and urgency to do so is firmly located in the now. And the future we're writing towards is not so mythical as it may have felt to readers 30 years ago when Octavia Butler published The Parable of the Sower. It is also not so perfect that it is a world without sorrow. I'm thinking more in line with Tina Camp's Black feminist mapping of the grammar of Black futurity, which she defines in the tense of the future real conditional. To put that succinctly, Camp theorizes futurity in the tense of that which will have had to happen to make Y possible. Near the end of listening to images, Camp poses these questions. How do we live the future we want to see now when confronted with the statistical probability of premature Black death? How do we create an alternative future by living both the future we want to see while inhabiting its potential foreclosure at the same time? Where listening to images ends with these unanswered questions is where my reimagining begins in an effort to think through methodological challenges of the now. These field notes that I'll share reimagine the relationship between Lauren Olamina's conceptualization of Earthseed, my own field work between 2012 and 2016, and the future in hopes that we might reconfigure the work that we do in the present moment. They are a conversation between Lauren, me, and an ethnographer / archivist / earthseeder in the future, however they might define themselves. They are one instantiation of what is possible if the field notes or research that we collect were freely available, given over to the community and held in a library or a public archive or some time capsule for the express purpose of building new worlds. So for the rest of this talk, all of us who are here, we are Earthseed. What I have talked about as palimpsests and ephemerality are not novel or new. They're essential to our beliefs, to how we understand space and how we understand how we might survive. From Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Belief initiates and guides action, or it does nothing. It's an excerpt from a field note in 2013. You have an excerpt on the screen, and I'm going to read a little bit more than this. Okay, back to Mr. Harris's home. When we opened the door, first thing I said was, wow, this man has turned his apartment into a greenhouse. Plants in recycled plastic jug containers, planters and seeds and leaves in recycled plastic Jell-O fruit containers, crowding the single window in his living room. He's growing various peppers, tomatoes, lemon trees, orange trees, and a pine tree, all in his apartment. There are 5 exclamation points here in my field note. He's also growing a plant that he's growing a plant called the mother's tongue, though he's not sure if that's the proper name for it. He started those plants from a cutting he took from his grandmother's garden, the person who taught him about gardening. One of his neighbors was so excited about the garden at the project, he ordered seeds from China. Neither he nor his neighbor know what those seeds are, and when I Googled it, I came up with nothing. Anyway, it's amazing. He told me they tried to get funding for a greenhouse, but did not receive it. So what was the next best thing? He cares for each plant in his own home, moving them around to get more light, watering them, repotting them. The plants spill over into his kitchen. And I wonder, does he have any space to cook? Mr. Harris recycles plastic containers and uses them as planters. The gardeners compost. They save the seeds from peppers and apples and oranges, and those have been used to plant the current crop. Now, it's unclear whether they are doing this as a result of not having much money, making a way out of no way, but I don't think that matters at all. The current interest or obsession with sustainability in this country is so marked by visibility. If there once was a period of conspicuous consumption that marked middle classness, then I'd say we're in a period of conspicuous sustainability now. But the folks here aren't doing this for airtime. They're trying to keep their garden alive by any means necessary. They fit well within a legacy of creating opportunities and sustainable lifestyles that is so much a part of Africana history. Even in the face of being relocated and having their homes torn down, members of this community are still planting life, literally and figuratively. From Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Your teachers are all around you. All that you perceive, all that you experience, all that is given to you or taken from you, all that you love or hate, need or fear will teach you if you will learn. God is your first and last teacher. God is your harshest teacher, subtle, demanding, learn or die. Field note, 17th of May, 2114. Today we plant. They try to feed us intravenously and we refuse. They laugh, but we still refuse. They think that we do not know that there are other ways. They think that we do not remember that food grows in the ground, not only in labs. They talk about efficiency. They tell us we do not have to be hungry. This is the one point on which we agree. We do not have to be hungry and we will not be. The books and guides that teach people how to grow food on their own have all been destroyed, except the ones that we have. Our ancestors who were growers saved seeds, and some others documented their practices. Some artists created art with seeds. which turned out to be a good thing because they were hidden in plain sight. About 100 years ago, researchers, writers, artists, and activists began creating archives outside of traditional institutions, collecting and storing things in vessels buried in underground. That is why we have the seeds and know what to do with them. We dug those up, and along with the knowledge of the elders who still live, we have planted. Harvest soon comes. From Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Once or twice each week, a gathering of earthseed is a good and necessary thing. It vents emotion, then quiets the mind. It focuses attention, strengthens purpose, and unifies people. Field note, 17th of May, 2014, the farmer's market. I wasn't sure what to expect. I had not been to Marvin Gaye's Park or that part of Deanwood in general. When we drove up, my partner asked, "Is this it?" There was a building to our left that had some people milling around, and I said, "I think so." So we parked and we hopped out of the car. Andrea had suggested that we walk inside to see the artwork there. It was called The Visual Harvest. There was a sign describing the exhibit as The Visual Harvest is a collection of art from artists who are communally minded, environmentally friendly, and visually intrigued. The art represented in this exhibition is that of what harvest really is, a pulling together of community to celebrate life. Our favorite piece looked to be an African woman with a baby on her back. The artwork looked like it was made from seeds. As we were walking out of the room with the artwork, we ran into who we came to know as Christine. She walked up to introduce herself, and since she seemed like someone who was in charge, I assumed that she was the woman who I had been in contact with. I introduced myself, said we had been emailing, and then we embraced. This is what I like about Black people. We love to hug. The event was marketed as a farmer's market, but there were more vendors than actual produce. Vendors, vegetables or otherwise, could participate free of charge, an experiment to both increase participation and to reduce the barriers to access. Strawberries, watermelons, potatoes, bell peppers, and apples rounded out the produce that was available for the day, which in my estimation wasn't very much. The organizer, who I met for the first time, talked about people who were hanging out in the park. She mentioned that some of the men bought most of the strawberries, at least $20 worth. As we were getting ready to leave, a man who appeared to be intoxicated in one way or another came over from the park to buy an apple. The organizers and the vendors welcomed him and others, and it was nice to see them not ignoring or pretending that the park, the site of a former well-known open-air drug market, was not also part of the community. Food is just the glue, they said. It's the nexus between culture, music, and health. Earthseed, the Book of the Living. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. 16th of April, 2214, field note, and to survive. There is no more space to build. Here on this bridge between Starshine and Clay, one cannot buy more space. One cannot buy relevance or stature or importance. Here on this bridge between Starshine and Clay, we marvel at our survival. The elders say the end of the world was not sudden, but that is hard for me to believe. One day we were there, and today we are here trying to make a way out of no way, but they tell us that it took years for Monsanto to own the patents to almost every seed that exists, except the ones that are held by us, of course, and our indigenous kin. They say we only have those because of something called the seed swap back then. They also tell us that the Gates Corporation didn't always own 85% of the arable land in the world, that they first made people believe that they cared about others through modernizing the world through technology, and then through philanthropy. And one day, everyone looked up and they were just buying land. But our elders say that they and our ancestors trained for this, that this making a way is not new to them, and there are signs all around us. Those ancient ways are how and why we survive. The ancestors braided seeds in their hair and they painted paths to this bridge in their artwork. They practiced systems of exchange that were not based on money so that those practices would carry on in our memories. They knew when we get here. They knew that we could not depend solely on the earth to contain us or our secrets. So they hid them and they carried them in their hair, in their bodies, in their heart, in their stories. And we planted those seeds. We hung the art. They tell us we were never meant to survive, but I don't believe them. If we were not meant to survive, how and why did the ancestors leave us so much? God has changed, but thank God for roadmaps. From Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Any change may bear seeds of benefit. Seek them out. Any change may bear seeds of harm. Beware. God is infinitely malleable. God is change. 29th of July, 2016. Field note, he's tired and sick. First stop, Mr. Jones's store. When I walked in, he was sitting in his same rolling chair with one leg propped on the counter. I said, "Hey, I came to see a man about a dog," and he laughed. I leaned over to give him a hug and he kissed my cheek. At that point, I noticed that he did not offer to get up or to give me he did not offer to get up and give me a hug. And I figured maybe he couldn't. Maybe he wasn't as mobile or feeling well. I took a seat and of course we began chatting about everything. I noticed that he was still wearing the necklace I gave him in 2014 after returning from South Africa. At some point while I was there, he let it slip that he had had surgery. He wouldn't say what he had had surgery on. And he told me he took out his earrings, but he told the nurse that he refused to take off that necklace. That made me smile. He hadn't taken it off since I'd given it to him. Just typing that right now makes me emotional. Mr. Jones is aging and his health is failing. At some point, I looked up and noticed that there was someone in the back, a stout Black man who would occasionally look up at us. I waved. He waved back, but he didn't introduce himself. I thought about going to introduce myself to him, but I didn't. I just kept glancing at him as he cleaned, stocked the cooler with more water, and organized the shelves. That man is Henry, Mr. Jones's other son, who I had not met. The 44-year-old is a cop for the Secret Service or the CIA. I need to double check. Mr. Jones says he's been doing that for 22 years and plans to retire. Henry mostly paid no attention to us as he went about his work, but I took note of him, mostly because during the week, there isn't usually anyone here in the store except Mr. Jones. Sometimes Rodney comes on the weekend, and that was another sign that he must not be doing well. While we were there, me and my student, I'm skipping about this field note, he mentioned that he is giving up the store. I can't do another winter. I don't want to do another winter. And that caught me off guard. I offered sympathetic understanding, but it made me really sad. I half jokingly said that he couldn't leave because I wouldn't know where to find him. He laughed and then told me he'd just give me his address. I know that neighborhoods change, businesses change, ownership changes, yet I cannot shake this feeling of incredible loss that will come when Mr. Jones closes the store. It isn't because the store necessarily feeds a lot of people. Sometimes they barely get that much business. It's because of this cultural and historical loss that will come with its closing. Regardless of how much business the store gets, it means a lot, and it means a lot to a lot of people, even to the many young kids who just come in to buy snacks after school. Mr. Jones knows them and quite possibly knows their families. Not only will the store close, but his brother across the street will close the barbershop, and they will never reopen the old restaurant. Those three will round out the closures of all the businesses on Sheriff Road, with the exception of a laundromat and the A&S corner store. Andrea let me know that Dave Brown's Liquor is looking to sell as well. It seems as if so many of the staples of that community will no longer be around. On the other hand, I feel it's really selfish to want to hold on to these stores, especially if the owners are tired and old and are sick and their children can't or won't take over. Why is it that our Black-owned businesses have to carry so much weight, have to fill so many voids? From the book of Earthseed, the book of the living. Earthseed cast on new ground must first perceive that it knows nothing. 28th of July, 2316, field note, a return. It has been a long fight, almost 100 years, but the place is ours again. Today, we take a pilgrimage back to the neighborhood we lost during the intense periods of gentrification that forced us all out. We touch the ground and we remember. We offer our first fruits of the season and we remember. We recommit to the communal practices whose roots are deeper than the beginning of this world, and we remember. This methodological exercise of writing speculative field notes is not only about the work of imagining various futures, but it's also thinking about how the work we do now participates in or anticipates writing our way towards or away from various possibilities. It is, as Anand Pandian writes, quote, attacking between close attention to what is and sweeping imagination of what else might be, end quote. In my engagement with this practice, I've not chosen to write futures where there is no hardship, no loss, no pain, and no inequity. Instead, I'm thinking about the consequences of the apocalyptic now, a world where billionaires like Bill Gates steadily purchase farmland and Monsanto patent seeds, for example, alongside the question, What do the food and communal practices I observed and recorded during my fieldwork look like in the future? What lives does it make possible? I want to think about how imagining a world 100 or 200 years into the future opens up possibilities for thinking about today or now and how we orient our research and writing practices. From Earthseed, the Book of the Living, the destiny of Earthseed is to take root amongst the stars. In 2025, Lauren Olamina writes, I don't know how it will happen or when it will happen. There's so much to do before it can ever begin. I guess that's to be expected. There's always a lot to do before you go to heaven. And so I write back to her from the past, 26th of April, 2021. Lauren, I wish I could say that on a global scale, we're doing things differently, such as to avoid the catastrophes that you experienced in 2024, but we're not. Instead, I fear things will get much worse before they get better. Just last week, we lost a beautiful Black girl who should still be here, changing the world with her creativity. Daily, thousands around the world are dying from this ongoing pandemic because profit continues to reign over people. And then there's the violent removal of Black people everywhere. Where else can we be displaced to, I wonder? And we who work for the university are getting restless, questioning its utility, trying to find new language, new methods for wrenching our labor from it and toward the building of Earthseed. But it's hard. We're faced with enclosure on all sides, but they do not know that our destiny is amongst the stars, but we do. And many of us are ready to put it all on the line to catapult us there. And if not us, those you lead in the future. And so we collect, we document, we use our university resources to support community work. We train, and we train. I don't know how it will happen or when it will happen or at what cost. But from the Book of Earthseed, we are Earthseed. We are flesh, self-aware, questioning, problem-solving flesh. We are that aspect of Earth life best able to shape God knowingly. We are Earth life maturing, Earth life preparing to fall away from this parent world. We are Earth life preparing to take root in the new ground. Earth life fulfilling its purpose, its promise, its destiny. Thank you.
Wow. I'm sure I am not the only one. Yeah, first, can we have some, that was, I feel like I had to, I realized I'm the moderator, but I needed a moment to process all of that and take that in. As I said at the beginning, for those of you who have not read Dr. Reese's writing, you can see how beautiful and powerful and extraordinarily powerful and haunting it is. Thank you so much for helping us. I am a huge Octavia Butler fan. So it was just beautiful to have you take us back to her work and to the personality and the character of Lauren Olamina, and to have us think about how we can creatively imagine ourselves now and into the future as Earthseed. So thank you so much for your presentation. For those of you who are listening, I know we have a very active chat, but for those of you who are listening, Dr. Reese has very generously volunteered to stay with us for a bit and respond to some questions. So if any of you are watching on YouTube, you should feel free to submit questions there, and they will make their way to me. And for those of you who are watching and participating via Zoom, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A feature, and we will respond to them there. As the questions start coming in, again, first, I just want to thank you for your presentation. Can you just talk to me a little bit about what made you make this connection to Octavia Butler's work, and what I love the future, the field notes written in the future, that are also connecting us back to this present moment, and actually even connecting us back to our ancestors. I felt like I was really, as a historian, I felt like I could really sort of see this beautiful connection between our, who I understand and perceive as our ancestors, but then also imagining myself as ancestors, right, to the people who are coming behind us. But if you could just say something about what inspired you to take this approach and to reconnect us to this idea of Earthseed.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the talk, I was first kind of introduced to this idea of speculative field notes through Ruha Benjamin. I saw her do a presentation like 3 years ago, and it never left me. I was like, this is really cool, but not just because it's cool and new, but like it made me think quite differently around why we're doing what we're doing in the present, and how much impact ripples that it's already creating for futures that we cannot even see. And so I've been thinking about that. And then in thinking about what she did, I was also thinking, but the work that, so I've been, like I said at the beginning, I've been rethinking a lot of spaces and the work that I've been doing. And I think that's kind of a blessing and a privilege of having published a book that's out, and then I have some space to really rethink. And I think in that rethinking, I was just caught up in the idea of how much loss, both, in the current moment of the pandemic, but also like who I call Mr. Jones in this and in the book, has passed on, but so have so many other people who I knew during research time. And I do not believe that when people die, they are forgotten. Fundamentally, I do not believe that. And so I was trying to think about what is true about places then? If I believe that about people, do I also believe that about places? So then I was thinking about, how do we see traces of places that no longer exist? And I can't remember how I got back to Octavia Butler, but when I did, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then I was thinking about how people have been rereading the parable of the sower, and I'm like, but y'all just reading this like this is fiction. Like, this is a handbook. Like, we need to be reading this like a handbook for how we can think about life and anticipate some of the struggles of making the life of the new world. Like, I think that there's been so much talk about otherwise possibilities and mapping new worlds. And I think the challenge of that is that if we believe in that, something has to change about our practices now, though. And so that's what I think those are the things that I was thinking about, that it sounds good to talk about otherwise worlds, but like, what are we doing now? Like, how are we creating them? How are we living them? And so that seemed to work quite well with Earthseed. And I went back through reread the book and was like, wow, this really, just the Earthseed entries, even if you just read those and you don't read the whole book, are just really powerful. And so many of them connected with experiences that I had in the field and things that I think could possibly come. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I was kind of all over the place. And then
No.
brought me together. So
Yeah, no, it really does. I think it just really, really resonated with me because for whatever reason, I found myself just in the past. It's probably as the result of the pandemic, but I found myself over the past like 6 or 9 months reconnecting with Parable of the Sower. I first read it years and years and years ago, and actually just recently gave the book to my oldest niece as a gift, and was like, let's read this together. And I wasn't even really sure what I was feeling so drawn to about revisiting that book, but your presentation today has really reminded me of why that is so powerfully important. There are some questions that are starting to roll in, but I do want to just before I get a chance to take a look at the questions, I do just want to ask you, really quickly, if you could just say something about what is so important about us imagining the future right now. And by us, I mean, in particular, us as Black folk, imagining the future right now. I actually happen to be in Columbus, Ohio right now. And so the community here has just been so powerfully shaken. By what happened to Ma'Khia Bryant and the murder of Ma'Khia Bryant. And you were just, you made a reference to that in your talk. And I do find myself, just on a personal level, struggling a bit with, I believe it is so important that we remain hopeful, that we focus on joy, that we return to what sustains us.
Yeah.
And yet I think we have to be honest about how incredibly difficult it is to do that sometimes. And so I was just wondering if you could just say something about what you feel like is so important about doing the work of
Mhm.
continuing to imagine not just a future, but I guess I would say a victorious future for ourselves.
Yeah, I think, when you were talking, I was thinking about part of the work of capitalism and anti-Black violence is that this kind of, I mean, it's a robbing of the imagination, right? So my first thought was like, we imagine because it's our birthright to imagine. Like it is. I mean, I am not someone who's a child psychologist. Like, maybe you can tell me if this is true. But I think that like one of the first things that you start to do is make up worlds, when you're younger. And I think about childhood me who used to read to cows and didn't think anything of it because they were my first students, right? Like I'm outside reading books to cows, which sounds ridiculous to me now, but it was this kind of way that I can imagine that world differently. Reading to those cows meant that like I was in a classroom, not on a dirt road in the country. It was a completely different space, right? And I think about that a lot, not just because I've chosen to teach, but because something about imagining gave me such a singular focus on something that I could literally see, right? And I could touch it, not in the way that we can, not necessarily in the physical way, but I felt touched by it, maybe I should say. And I think there's something powerful about that. I also, okay, what I'm going to say might, okay. So I think the thing about like imagining futures, when I was writing this, it's not that I don't want there to be a world without sorrow. I do, but I think we already foreclose possibilities when we assume that a victorious future looks like X. And so what I was trying to write to, or what I'm trying to think through, is there some sense of like self-determination that exists even if the whole world still stays the way that it is. And so this kind of idea of like passing down traditions and memories and experiences, even as Monsanto is taking over the world, even as the Bill Gates are doing the shit that Bill Gates is in the world too, are people still focused on building community and survival? That's what I think about a lot, right? Like if we depend on this world to change as the only way for us to have another world, I think we have already failed in some capacities. And so, I also think about, scale a lot. At what scale do we know a thing and how we experience a thing? And so like, to me, my personal imagination feels like the closest thing to my body, to like, that feels like a really close scale. And I think about like what happens when I join my kind of what I'm imagining and thinking about with what other people are imagining and thinking about. And I think about how that builds different scales, right? So I guess I'm just saying that like this kind of joy or love or care that we talk about, I don't know that it has to always be at such a scale that it is not close into your body, your community, the people that you're connected to. And even if it is, if we're all doing that, I think that still has ripple effects, right? I think that there's something about the nation state. Well, there's a lot of fucked up things about the nation state, but one of the things that it does too is presume that for change to be meaningful, it has to happen at that level. And I kind of wanted to question that. I do question that. I don't believe that. And I think the work that I've done with communities show that I don't, show that we can't believe that, right? Like literally the people were working and building this garden as their neighbors were being forced to relocate to live somewhere else. I don't know, like that just is always a powerful thing to me to see. If you can imagine this, like we're gardening and in the background, you literally see boarded up buildings and they could see that every day. And so to persist and to try to like still insist on life, I think is the work. And I think, imagination is one catalyst for us to do that.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love the framing of that around like the insistence, right, on embracing our lives, and embracing the joy. I'm have been working on this project recently looking at sort of the historical origins of the policing of our communities, going all the way back to um, the era of enslavement, and came across this law, this from like 1813, that explicitly outlawed demonstrations of Black joy.
Mm.
It's actually written into the legal codes. And it was so chilling for me because what I first sort of stuck on was, what exactly is it that is so threatening about our expressions of joy that you feel like you have to outlaw them?
Mm.
But more recently, I've been moving to the point of it's a reminder to me of how important it is that we do it. Like beyond the point of why it's so threatening to them, it's a reminder of how that it is threatening, that there is something just on an existential level that is extraordinarily powerful about our willingness to be joyful under the most horrific of circumstances, and our insistence, as you were saying, our insistence on being joyful and imagining a future for ourselves, a victorious future for ourselves under the most unimaginable, horrific of circumstances. And
I
so
was
I've almost gotten to the point where I don't even care why it's so threatening to them. It's just a reminder to me of how important it is we do it.
I was gonna say, Leslie, like, we were talking about joy, and I was just thinking about like life has to be tended to. That's the phrase that was coming to my brain. And I don't think I want a world where life doesn't have to be tended to, right? And so like even if all these other things change, even if like there's these big sweeping structural changes, and I mean I think we should always be trying to fight for some of those, that doesn't change the fact that we still have to tend to life and the living. And I think about this most with plants, you know. By all measures, my house plants are like, they live a pampered life. And you know what they still need? Me to take care of them. They don't have to do shit. Like they're like here, I mean, they do stuff, right? Sorry for people who love plants. Like plants do things. So I'm not saying they don't do anything, but like I still have to tend to them. And I still need to pay attention to them, not only just as a whole group, but individually. They don't all need the same things, right? They don't all call for the same things. And I think that's the kind of livingness that I'm interested in. How do we like pay attention to the granular everyday, and tend to it, And I think like joy, all these things they are ways of tending to the living.
Yes, absolutely. I just have to apologize. Speaking of the living, I have some people in my house in the background. So I keep trying to mute myself, but I apologize for the joyful demonstrations that you may periodically hear in the background. I keep texting them like, hello, I'm on a panel right now, but there are some Black joyful expressions happening downstairs. So my apologies. I do want to move to some of the questions that we have, and in particular, I want to start with a question that JT has posed about what what do you imagine some of these other trajectories might offer us, and in particular, he's asking, what would the field notes read like if we moved outside the current horizon?
So I have two thoughts on that. The first one is, I took it out of this talk, but one of the things that I've been thinking about is perhaps it's not just like how the field notes move, but how what intention we have for them from the beginning. And, as I was thinking about like all the stuff that I have, I conceived of public in a very different way, that perhaps I can take this stuff and like, oh, I can work with someone, we can make a documentary, we can do this. But I didn't think about making my own field notes public. And then even going back to read them. So in preparation for this talk, I went and read all of my field notes. And I was like, wow, you know what I would have done differently? I would have added more detail here, 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 and here. If I knew someone else was going to be reading this as if they knew nothing about this space, right? So I think the first thing is thinking about like, how do we open up our field notes? And of course, that might brings up some ethical questions for some of us, but how do we open up our field notes such that they are public and shared in some ways? And I don't know if she's still on here, but Adia Benton is one of the first people that I knew who would like publish some of her field notes on her website. And I thought that was really like a really good practice, right? But it was like a practice that somehow, you know, she chose on her own, but it's not like a standard practice, right? So I guess I think about what would be required for that. But in terms of what I think they could do for the future, all these alternative pathways. I don't know about my own, like, I'm going to take it out of my own work and like field notes in particular, but I think of things like Monica White's Freedom Farmers. I love seeing people's reactions to that book. I love seeing people talk about how the way she writes about like Fannie Lou Hamer all the way up to the present shifts something for them about what they think about farming. And to me, I wonder if that's possible when we think about just even the raw data that we're collecting. Like that's the book, that's what she put together. But I think if my field notes and stuff, if I had conceived of them as being public, someone could have created something else besides the book that I created with this material, right? So I guess like I am getting at, I don't know that it is up to me or us to decide what futures. I think it's up to me and us to decide, can we open up things that might create or make way for different futures? So that's a little different wording of the question, but like, you know, as anthropologists, everyone collects their own data in some way or another. And I just was thinking like, wow, like, what if someone didn't have to, and I just turned over all my stuff to them and they like analyzed it in a different, would that be a different experience? It would be a different experience. They would write something different. They would create something different. But not only that, like I did research in a neighborhood that has very little written history. And so I think a lot about how I wish this stuff could reside somewhere that isn't a university library or archive. And I don't know that maybe it can, but it's just stuff that I'm thinking about. I didn't ask for permission to do that though, right? Like, so I don't know. So this is what I mean by like learning from what I've done in the past to think if there's some things that I would do differently. And I think I would do this differently if I were doing another neighborhood kind of study.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We do have some more questions that have come rolling in. JT and Justin, do we have time for one or two more questions?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a question that came in from David Jones that was making a reference to a passage that you cited that seemed to suggest that one of the challenges facing us is to develop research methods that can kind of catapult us. And so the question is, would you be willing to revisit and perhaps even reread that and maybe elaborate on that point a bit more?
Yeah, so I think like, you know, we do research and we mostly talk to each other. And recently, or not recently, like this semester, I teach a research methods class for graduate students. And we listened to a talk by Kuguru Mancharya. And at the end of his talk, he says, "Who is gathered by your invitation?" And I am just slain by that. I think about this a lot. And one of my students like reminded us of this last week or last class. And so what I love about that question, who is gathered by your invitation, is that it forces me to think about who are my audiences? How do I do research in a way that can have impact in in other words, I guess like for me, research has to be something more than just my individual curiosity. And if it's more than my individual curiosity, how do I make sure that it can get into the other people can be gathered and invited into this space with me? And so I guess one thing I would say on a very like, besides, you know, allowing people to be along the research journey with you, I'm a big component of writing in non-academic journals. I think it matters. I really think it matters. I don't think it makes your work less rigorous. And I actually think it's kind of a challenge, right? Like the Oxford American piece, Leslie, that you mentioned, I was so stressed out about writing that. And it was so hard because I couldn't hide behind citations. I couldn't hide behind like, let me just couch this argument in this way. I had to think about what feels true about this. How do I fit? And I also don't write a lot of things about my personal self and stuff. So anyway, there's a whole nother thing. So what feels true about this? How do I fit and how am I implicated in this as well? And then like, what do I want this to do? I think beautiful writing matters just because it's beautiful, but I also think beautiful writing moves people, literally, like moves them emotionally, but can move people. And so I guess like this kind of catapulting is also rethinking who we're talking to. And how do we make sure that people we want to be talking to get to hear what we're having to say?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's beautiful. I think that's really, really important. And I like the way you're thinking about multiple ways to move people, right? Moving people emotionally, but also inspiring people to take action. I think we have time for one more question that came in from YouTube from Amber Woodburn. Just wondering if you could share some reflections on how imagination can be integrated into pedagogy, particularly to emotionally support Black students who are studying painful histories. And Amber gives some examples like confronting erasure or learning about urban renewal, and kind of reflected on the fact that it seemed to give some hope and catharsis while you were completing your own work. So if you could maybe say something about how imagination might be used as a teaching tool, especially with Black students.
Yeah, so I can tell you like some of the assignments that I use in my Black Geographies course. So this semester, students have to create a Black Geographies portfolio, and it has all these different components. But one of the components that I'm most excited about, and some of them are most freaked out about, is that they have to write a recipe. They have to write a speculative recipe related to their topic. And it doesn't have to be something that can physically be made. It does not have to be something that is edible. They just have to make a recipe. And they're like, Dr. Reese, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? Like, this is where you get to stretch, right? And like, so for example, I have a student who is like doing a project on the ways highways have like intersected Black communities historically, et cetera, et cetera. And I just asked her, I was like, if you were writing about what this, if you were making a recipe about what this feels like, or what this experience is like for people who have lived here during the time, what does that taste like, right? Does it taste like despair? Does it taste like resistance? Does it taste like hopelessness? What does it taste like? And what do you imagine hopelessness tasting like? So anyway, they make this and they're like, I don't know. Y'all ask me in a week or two how it's going. I'm not sure yet, but like it's one way that we do this. For my food class, I have a class, food in the racialized city. Last semester, students had to make a 1-minute advertisement for a restaurant, an imagined restaurant that had certain social justice principles. And they could create it however they wanted to. They could create it at any time period if they wanted to. And that was cool. I really enjoyed those assignments. And then the last thing that we did last semester is students created a zine. And the part of the prompt for the zine was, if this were the handbook that was left about food, how to do food justice, what would you include in it? And then they created that. So I guess one last thing I want to say about this is that a lot of the practices around imagination that I use in my class necessarily are public facing. Because I don't know, my experience with students is that it's easier to imagine when they know what the audience is or who the audience is outside of themselves. And so it's always fun.
I absolutely love that. And I don't know, I feel like I'm going to be asking like JT and Justin to invite you back to tell us about how the recipes turned out, because now I'm going to be super curious.
Oh, yeah, I'm super curious about it too. I need to write one myself. I feel like I need to write one so that they can.
That's fair.
Yeah. We'll see.
Thank you so much. JT and Justin, let me know. I think we might be out of time. Okay, I just want to thank the two of you for inviting me to participate. This has been such a pleasure. I feel like my whole consciousness has been expanded and lifted this afternoon. So thank you so much. And Dr. Reese, thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Alexander and Dr. Reese. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, Justin. And thank you to all of the folks who have been coming to this. This is our final thing. And I think we couldn't have asked for a more inspiring and imaginative, really tour de force. You crossed theoretical boundaries. You went through literature and ethnographic notes and history, but also pedagogy and like political futures and practical futures. So we are just so happy that you have come to put a real point on our shared time together for this series, this Black Ecologies series, Dr. Reese. And thank you, so much, Dr. Alexander, for facilitating such a wonderful discussion. Again, I just want to, I'm very humbled. I have shared on social media, so I'll say it here. I lost an aunt today, or last night, actually, my father's first cousin, who I consider an aunt. And I'm invoking her in this space because, like my father, she died of congestive heart failure, right? So for me, this Black Ecology series has been so inspiring. Not only am I stepping away with such new and pointed analysis and shared communal analysis from the work that folks have done, but really charged with how to move forward, how to think Black ecologies beyond the kind of extraction horizon, the horizon of disposability that we know currently governs Black life. So thank you all for your participation, for your engagement. I know some folks have been at every one of these, and sometimes it'd be hard for me to be at every one of these. So Justin and I think we were ambitious in having so many talks, but or so many discussions, but it's been so fruitful, and we're just so honored to have shared this time with you all. All of these posts will be up at IHR's YouTube for about 6 months, and then you can't get them no more. So go watch them now. Don't play yourself. So yes, and again, thank you all so much. Thank you to our sponsors who were listed at the beginning. Scroll back if you want to know who those were again. We won't go through that again. We love them and we appreciate them. And I want to say thank you to Justin and to the other folks on the planning committee, Emerald, Leah, and Alexis, for just conceiving of this whole process and this whole project, really being in community with us to do that. And I particularly want to thank the IHR folks, and I want to thank the SST folks who really have made this possible, right? We said that at the beginning, but you all have really made this whole thing possible. So with that said, we're going to end the recording. Generally, folks be lingering because it's just a good time in the background. But no pressure. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for tuning in. And this has been the Black Ecologies 2021 Spring Series. So thank you.
Recording.